Good morning and welcome to Sales TV on a sunny Tuesday, which is absolutely brilliant and a change from last week. We are joined by one of our regular hosts, Adam Gray. Say good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Adam. Yes, and the humour's already top notch. And we're also joined by our guest today, which is a gentleman called Louis Fernandes, who has been telling us before we actually went live that that's his office. And he's got a bar. Just imagine you're looking in, you as the audience are sat on top of the bar. So do help yourself to anything that you want whilst you're there. It's an honour bar, so that's fine. Louis, you and I met a few weeks ago at a conference. We had a really interesting conversation about people getting go-to-market strategy and execution wrong. Could you tell us a bit about yourself, your history, and why this subject's really important to you? And then we've got some questions that we're going to ask you so that hopefully the audience can find out a bit more about the thinking you've got behind it. So let's start with who you are and how you got here.
Well, brilliant. Firstly, thank you very much, both of you, for having me along today. I'm really delighted to be here. So, as you said, my name's Louis Fernandes. I have been working in SaaS now for about 20 years. And during the course of that time, over the last sort of decade, I've been in sort of revenue leadership positions in scaling SaaS businesses. So that's been anything from sort of, 10, 20 million to 100 million. It's that sort of journey that I've been on. So one of the reasons that I talk about go-to-market as being a really important piece is because I've seen it go wrong a lot of times and occasionally been party to it myself. So it's one of these things. I think you learn a lot from mistakes that you make along the way and on the journey, but equally you also see some of the practices that work and also see, things that don't, not necessarily in your own organization, but elsewhere as well. I think the other thing as well is because I came into revenue leadership and sales actually a little bit late in life. I started life actually off as a marketer, sort of client-side marketer. Then went to agencies, and then the agency that I was working for got bought by a tech company. Hence, I've ended up in technology.
Yep.
It's one of these things. I've always approached revenue generation and sales with a bit of a marketing hat on, and that has meant that strategically I sort of look at what are we doing from a go-to-market perspective in terms of how are we defining our markets, how are we defining our ICPs, how are we doing segmentation, targeting, positioning of our products and services in a way that is relevant to and resonant with the customers we want to target. So it's always been that sort of an approach.
Excellent. And just before we delve into the questions, because Adam, I think it's fair to say that you were around at the pivot towards SaaS, not saying that you're old, but you worked in a large tech company that actually acquired the company that I worked for, and kind of exited hardware in quite a big way and went into software. And then actually, Louis, what you're talking about is this kind of strange, almost different type of sales thing that just grew and arrived. And I think they say that SaaS now is something like a 7 trillion sort of like industry in its own right, but 1999, 2000, it pretty much didn't exist.
Yeah.
And I know that we talked to some people who are in what we would call the classic sales function, where they do have products and solutions, and it's not necessarily anything to do with technology. It could be print manufacturing or FMCG. They feel that kind of SaaS has maybe somewhat hijacked the whole kind of sales function because it's grown so quickly and it's changed that process. So, what do you see as the SaaS marketplace before we dive into the 5 or so questions that we've got for you? How have we got here with SaaS?
I think it's been one of these things that if I think about enterprise software as it used to be, right? You'd sell something, for want of a better term, on a disk. Okay, people would upload it somewhere and they would then run the infrastructure. And I think the whole change in mentality from actually, we don't just want to have the provision of a product. We want the provision of a service whereby you look after us and you manage the infrastructure, you manage the security, you manage the uptime, all those different types of things in a remote way. And all actually I'm paying for as a consumer of those services is a service level agreement, effectively. That's what it is. And I think the risk profile has changed over time, so that the risk now sits with the vendor, rather than actually you've bought your software. It's now up to you to manage that, and everything about it, patches, whatever, all of that risk has gone. So I think that's part of it. The other thing, again, I think was the financial change. So, from a CapEx to an OpEx expenditure, and actually, the ongoing ability to say, actually, if I don't like it, I can move quite easily. Well, relatively so compared to what it used to be like.
Okay, so thanks for that. I think that's a very good backdrop. Now you've given that, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see in SaaS companies going to market?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the big challenge oftentimes is that it gets too complicated too quickly. So I think that a lot of companies, they want to be all things to all different organizations, and suddenly you end up with too many features in your product that you're always talking about. You're servicing too many segments. You end up with too many product tiers, lots and lots of permutations and combinations of what you can do. And what that ends up with is you end up then with fragmented messaging when you go to market, so that there's no clear value proposition. Your core messaging gets lost, customers get confused, and then you end up actually with a lack of cohesion, I think, between sales and marketing and product teams. So I think that's where the main challenge lies. And, I think I've seen that on a number of occasions where you end up with these huge organizations all trying to sort of explain what it is that the product does or the service does, and nobody really understands it, and there's massive confusion. And I think, with that broad audience that you're trying to serve, you end up with that inconsistent messaging, you end up with too many versions of things, and it just stretches resources in an organization, which then ultimately affects your unit economics. And that's something that, again, I think plays a lot into go-to-market strategy, that the lack of understanding of what over-complicating your GTM strategy does to your unit economics. And it's no surprise that right now SaaS finds itself a little bit in a crisis point. I mean, the last couple of years, when we've seen, money drying up from VCs and private equity firms, and the real focus now on, not just revenue growth at all costs, but profitable, sustainable, predictable revenue growth. I mean, who knew that profit was going to be one of those things that we focus on? I sat there and I thought, well, back in the 1980s, when I first came into industry, we always used to talk about, revenue for vanity, profit for sanity. And it's something that, as an industry, I think we forgot for 10 years when, it was effectively free money. So I think all of these things have helped overcomplicate go-to-market strategies. And now actually we've got to parse it down and really simplify. I hope that makes sense.
Isn't there an issue though when you simplify the product down to its? So I think the challenge that we have in sales of any complex strategic purchase is that you're the expert, you're the vendor, I'm the buyer.
Yeah.
Therefore, by nature of that, I'm ignorant in my knowledge of the product and the marketplace compared to you. Because if I wasn't, I'd do it myself. I wouldn't need you guys.
Yep.
So for me, I'm buying something which is fairly central to the product. I think that's what I'm buying.
Yeah.
When I look out into the marketplace, I see loads of vendors that appear to be the same. They're all doing products that are CRM systems, for argument's sake. So the only differentiator that you can offer is that complexity in those features. Even though, ironically, I'm often blind to those. But you're desperately looking to put clear water between yourself and the competitors. So haven't you got like a balancing act between these two things? You need to offer a different product or service. However, I'm buying something at a very fundamental level rather than a very complex level as the buyer.
Yeah, and I think that you've hit the nail on the head with the last sentence you just said. You're buying something very fundamental. So what are those fundamentals? How do you explain how those fundamentals play into core metrics of an organization? Ultimately, you can have as many bits and bytes and speeds and feeds as you like, but what is the outcome that they deliver to your organization, and how do we talk about it in those kind of terms? And actually, when you're making those kind of large purchase decisions, if you're asking me to part with £500,000 on a particular solution, or 10 million, or whatever it happens to be, do I really care fundamentally when I'm making that decision about the nitty-gritty of, does it come in blue or does it come in red? Do I care about that? Or do I care that actually, one, it's not going to put my company at risk, so that's the first priority, and number two, it's going to give me a return on the investment and address 2 or 3 core points that are absolutely fundamental, to use your word, to what we do.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think that's really interesting, because I was always taught, Louis, that every company is a brand and a factory, and you just hit the nail on the head there, which is, you do not want to put that brand at risk, and you want the factory to go quicker. You want to be more productive. Now, that is a very, very simplistic way of looking at it, and I've never been able to actually shape that simplicity. But if we look at the next question that we want to pose to you, which is, why is simplicity so critical in go-to-market strategy?
I think it almost dovetails into what we were just talking about, because it cuts through that noise in a crowded market. As things stand at the moment, we started talking about CRM, so let's stick with sort of CRM, MarTech, those kind of things. Scott Brinker, a guy I'm sure you guys will have come across. He does the Chief MarTech Marketing Landscape chart. When he brought that out in, what was it, I think 2011, there may be 150, 200 products on there. Right? That's 2011. Fast forward to this year. When he published it, I think there were over 14,000 different technologies on there. Right? 14,000. Now, absolutely, MarTech has become larger as a category. No question. It's not become 100 times larger in 10 years. Right? It's just not the case. So if I now have to compete against 14,000 different other vendors, the simplicity of my message will cut through that noise, because customers feel overwhelmed as it is. If I can focus then on real value drivers, a bit to the point we're just talking about, what are those fundamentals? What are the real value drivers of my solution, of my service, of my product? And then, that's what I start communicating. If I can communicate that, then what I think it inevitably leads on to is smoother buying journeys and shorter sales cycles. And the customer immediately understands the product's core benefits. So how's that not a good thing? The other thing that I think happens as a consequence of this is that internally within organizations, one of the things we've always talked about for as long as I've been in this space, right, has been, how do you get sales and marketing to align? Sales and marketing alignment, it's one of the big bugbears that a lot of organizations have. If you can make your strategy, make your message simplistic, that's something that even internal stakeholders start to understand. We can all get behind that message. We can all drive, the same towards the same outcomes, and that actually creates that cohesion internally, which I think is vital.
It's at the conference where we met. Actually, there was the lady from LinkedIn, the B2B Institute for LinkedIn.
Yep.
And she talked all about, obviously, memory share. So if you go back to your 1400, titles, technologies, solutions, whatever you want to call them, how do you get market memory share for prospective buyers in that market? And you're right, simplicity of the core message is really, really, really vital. So a great comment here from Paul. Thank you for that, Paul. Please do post your comments. He's put here, always cost versus opportunities not taken if you do nothing, which I think is brilliant. Helps us pivot to the next question, which I've got my thoughts on, but it's not about my thoughts, it's about Louis. So can you talk us through the importance of segmentation, targeting and positioning in a successful go-to-market strategy?
Sure. I think it's important to define what these things are. You know, I mean, for me, segmentation, targeting, positioning is kind of like marketing 101. So segmentation, it's about identifying and prioritizing the highest value customer groups. That's the first thing we need to do. What do they look like? What are the similarities? What are the sort of common needs that they have? Targeting then lets you direct your internal resources and messaging towards those high value groups. So that's about, these are the people we're going to go after because they're in our ICP, our ideal customer profile. And that's where we need to actually direct our efforts towards, because they're going to be the highest value to us as an organization. The last bit, positioning, that's where you sort of start articulating the unique value of your product or service in a very clear and memorable way. That's how I would sort of define those things. Now, the reason I think this is vitally important to get right, because not only does that going through that process help you define what your ICP looks like, it also helps ensure internally that everybody understands what it is. Okay, so one of the things that I've talked about a lot in the past is this temptation that sales organizations particularly have to go after something that is a bit opportunistic. Might not be in my ICP, right? But it's got some immediate value that I can recognize right now, and off I go. And it's great because from a headline perspective, we've just done a big deal. It looks fantastic, but then you get into your problems. It's not a great fit for the product or the service. It's not a great fit for the company. You end up spending a lot more resource, time, effort, energy, and money on servicing it. And ultimately, 6-12 months down the line, that customer's not happy anyway, and they try it. So you end up with an entire problem. But this is why I think it's so vitally important, because again, from a unit economics point of view, and I will keep on coming back to this unit economics point, you end up making more money by focusing on customers that exactly fit your ICP through that segmentation, targeting, and positioning process, than you do by taking things on the periphery that you're not necessarily well addressed to deal with. There's a great example for me. One of the best examples actually in SaaS at the moment is around Xero. So the accounting software folks. A couple of years ago, they articulated very, very clearly what their go-to-market strategy was going to be. They've got two segments they focus on. It's basically small businesses from 1 to 20 employees. That's who they build for. Very clear. And they're really clear. That is what we're going to go after. And these are the routes to market that we're going to follow. And anything outside of that, yeah, we might do those things, but we're not building for them. So that's not our core proposition. That's not our core market. That's not what we're doing. And if you look at their numbers, if you look at things like the rule of 40, I think they were just over 40, 40.1 or something like that. 41% is what it was. Sorry. You look at the revenue growth that they've enjoyed over the last couple of years. You look at the profit margins that they're hitting. You know, that to me really, really extols the virtues of great segmentation, targeting, and positioning, because they know exactly what they're going after and why they're doing it.
So how do you keep your team focused on that? Because in my experience of working with organizations of all sizes, their heads are easily turned. So you're exactly the kind of people that we need to be doing business with. But oh, look at that over there. There's an opportunity. And people, you know, it's very difficult, particularly people in a customer-facing role. And I'm not vilifying salespeople when I say this, but you know, they're people pleasers. Somebody comes to them and says, "Sure, I'd like to buy from you." Well, yes, absolutely. I'd like to help you. And it's very easy to be distracted from that vision, isn't it? That kind of, okay, you are a perfect fit with us and people like you. But, you know, who are you selling to? Well, men and women. You know, actually, that's not a segment, is it?
Yeah. And I think it's a great point. And I think there are three things at play here. Number one, it's around, basically leadership. So from a leadership perspective, how do we learn to say no? Okay, because again, any sort of segmentation, targeting, positioning that you're doing, it's as much, and any go-to-market strategy, it's as much about what you're saying no to as to what you're saying yes to. So it's a leadership thing. The second thing then, talking about leadership, is actually about frontline management. And they, I think, are one of the most underserved cohorts in any organization. So supporting them to make decisions that are negative. So I am not going to pursue this because it doesn't fit our ICP. I know that my back is covered because I've got the air cover from my line manager and so on and so forth. So that becomes really important. And then I think the last thing then is compensation, comp plans. Compensation drives behavior. Who knew? So if you incentivize people to stick within an ICP, guess what? They'll do it because they get paid more. It's not that hard. Well, I say it's not that hard. I say that a little bit tongue in cheek. It is bloody difficult, but I think it's about just continually reinforcing that kind of behavior, and you've got to model that behavior as well as a leader.
Yeah, I think that is such a refreshing viewpoint. I'm glad Adam asked that question, because it is always, if you haven't got enough pipeline, if you haven't got enough deals, you'll go over and straight out of your swim lane. And actually, I don't know if anyone's ever kind of investigated it, but you must burn far more time there and take yourself further away from being able to achieve your targets and goals, as opposed to just finding a lot more of those people who fit in that. It's very interesting. I lived with a previous employer looking at segmentation, and just to pick up the viewpoint we had is, well, let's have this wacky idea and look at customers from their perspective, not from what they spend. Because if we look at who they are and what they use technology for, we may find that we can serve a niche of them a lot better than actually our competitors. Moving again to the next question, how does an organization, we've talked about MarTech in this example, 1,400 types.
14. Sorry, did I misspeak? I meant 14,000.
14,000. Okay, it's probably
like 150 to 14,000.
I'm not very good with numbers, as Adam will attest, so we'll just put an extra naught on that in a minute. How with 14,000 do you ensure that your go-to-market resonates with the people you try and talk to? I mean, you talked about Xero. How did they make that resonate?
Okay, so this is another thing that I think is quite interesting. What Xero did, I think, quite well a few years ago, especially when it became to making tax digital. They did a great brand campaign. And one of the things that I think a lot of organizations get wrong is they focus on, we need leads. Give me more leads. I need 1 billion leads. Bring me leads. There's a great piece of work, and you and I have talked about this before, Andrew, by Les Binet and Peter Field, along the short of it. And it talks about, and this is something that, again, I think marketers will be familiar with, salespeople less so. And it just talks about how you balance brand activation with sales activation. So going back to what you need to start with having a clear, compelling value proposition that's easy to remember. Then you need to start talking about that. And you need to align that messaging across not just what you're doing in sales, but what you're doing with marketing and product teams, and then get that message out there. So how do I do that through a brand activation perspective? And how do I do that as well in my, sales activation with demand generation and whatever else I'm doing? And I think that's part of what you need to do. And again, going back to the conference we were just talking about, there was that whole piece that B2B Institute did about, what is the value of one set of eyeballs on your message if you had 1 million people seeing it once, or 500,000 people seeing it twice, what delivers more value? Well, it's actually the actual penetration. So 1 million people seeing it once, because you get better recall.
Yeah.
So and that I think was quite striking, and it really feeds into that narrative about, you know, you've got to do brand activation alongside sales activation, and you've got to make sure that the messaging is consistent. You've got to keep the customer journey simple, and then you've got to use real world use cases to make that value proposition relatable. Okay, so it's all great that we've got the bells and the whistles and all this kind of stuff over here, but we did this with XYZ company, and this was the outcome ABC. Boom. You know, talking about it in real terms, I think, is really, really important.
I think that's great. So, you know, that's back to what is the outcome, or as Andy Bounds would talk about it, what's the actors? Previous person on one of the shows, which is great. You know, it comes back to and it morphs us actually to the final question. You know, nobody wants a 4 millimeter drill; they all want a 4 millimeter hole. But we do tend, unfortunately, to have product marketing and product development kind of get sucked into that trap. So the last question we would pose to you is, you know, how do sales, marketing, and product development, product marketing that a lot of people have, how do they align to actually make an effective go-to-market?
Okay, so I think one of the most misunderstood functions within most SaaS businesses that I've been in is product marketing. And I always see product marketing as almost being the glue between sales, marketing, and product teams, so that they can define things like, you know, what is that unified value proposition and who is that ideal customer profile? Because they should be both facing the market in terms of, you know, understanding what the market needs are, but also then aligning internally to sort of say, how do we develop the product in a way that actually meets those customer needs that are being articulated? How do we create the sales and marketing collaterals and messaging frameworks that then are going to resonate with those ICPs, the personas, the organizations, and address the real issues? So I think that's where you kind of need to start. From there, you then develop those shared playbooks. So, you know, what does that playbook look like? And do we all agree on that? Because it shouldn't be just you know, we've done this in a vacuum over here. You need to bring the other people in an organization together. So that is sales, marketing, and product folks all together. We agree on what the playbook needs to be and how that then needs to maybe change subtly for different segments and different personas. And then we also use feedback loops to keep all the teams updated on customer insights, you know, so when the market changes, we then sort of understand, you know, this is how it's changing. This is how we need to adapt, because it almost goes back to this idea of product market fit. You know, a lot of people think product market fit is a one-time thing. It's one and done. Let's move on. It's not. It's continually evolving as your market evolves, as, you know, economies evolve, as needs evolve. Your product market fit needs to evolve as well. And this is no different. And then I think that by doing all those kind of things, you can then sort of get much better alignment across the business. You get better customer satisfaction. You realize operational efficiencies. And actually, again, who knew, you get better forecasting accuracy because you're actually talking about things that actually people want to buy in a way that they want to buy it.
That's brilliant. Adam, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, well, I certainly can do. I think, you know, there's a nice simplistic pragmatism to this way of doing things. You know, am I selling a product that people actually want to buy? And am I articulating it in a way that they can actually understand it? And I think that so often business, particularly VC or investor funded business, is all smoke and mirrors. And you said earlier about how it's a profit for sanity rather than vanity. You know, what we often see is SaaS businesses being acquired or being invested in on the promise of something magical happening at some point down the road. A cautionary tale for this is Rand Fishkin's book Lost Than Founder, where he founded a very successful business, and the investors in the business didn't want to dispose of the business when they should have done, and consequently it became almost valueless. And I think that so often people forget these basics. You know, if you don't sell stuff, you don't have a business. And part of that is understanding this how are you taking your product to market and making it attractive to people. So, you know, it's been a brilliant conversation today. Thank you so much, Louis, for joining us. And thank you, Andy, for sharing.
No problem at all. Louis, I'll extend that. Thank you. It's been brilliant to hang out with you. We will follow up on the channel with some of the recommendations that Louis talked about and Adam talking about in terms of the books to go and have a read of. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for your participation. And we look forward to you tuning in tomorrow and next week.
Thanks very much, guys. It's been a pleasure being on.
Brilliant. Thank you, Louis.
Thanks, Louis.